Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to help the channel grow and keep up to date with the latest videos. Hi and welcome to another video by me, FlowJo. Today we're going to be looking at getting started with creating adaptive cards for Microsoft Teams. Now, the best place to start when creating adaptive cards, especially if you've never looked at adaptive cards before, is the adaptivecards.io/designer website. When you open this website, you're going to be presented with a lot of information, a lot of structured website design where you've got card structures, element properties, payload editor, all of these different things. So before we begin, let's actually take a look at what we're working with. At the top here, you've got your navigation bar and basically action bar. You've got the new card, so if you press this, you'll be shown different templates and blank cards, etc. You've got the select host app where you can then select the different type to view how it's going to look on different applications. But let's just stick with the standard at the moment. You've got the host app documentation, templating documentation. You can copy the card payload, which is all of this code here that you're going to need to use when you're sending your adaptive card. You can click on the preview mode. Then you've got target version and your help. So, what is card elements then? Card elements are effectively drag and drop elements that you can put onto your card. So let's just say we drop this here, and you can see we can effectively build the structure by dragging and dropping. When you're in this area here in the center screen, this is basically your interactive adaptive card builder. This is a visual representation of what is in your card payload editor. Then on the right hand side, you've got your card structure. You can see that we've got our whole adaptive card here. And then we've got a text block, which is effectively the title, the publish adaptive card schema. And then we've got columns and images, etc. And you can select all of these items from here rather than selecting them straight from the adaptive card itself. Then we've got element properties. Now, if let's say we click on the title, you can see that we have all of the element properties here. The data context, only show when, if it has a particular ID, if it's visible. Now this initially visible allows you to effectively toggle what is and what isn't visible. So if you're sending an adaptive card to certain users that you want to hide something, whereas you want to display it to other users, this is a really good feature that you can use. Then you've got the text field. Now this is just doing $ and then passing through the title, which is effectively referring to the sample data, but you can just manually code this yourself. So FlowJo, and there you go. It shows you directly what happens on the adaptive card through your visual editor and reflects directly on here. So if we then click on Microsoft Teams, you can see what it looks like. Let's go back to the standard bot framework. Right, what do we do next then? We've got all of these properties, we've got all of this structure, we've got all of this area we are working with, and we've got our elements. Well, the card payload editor is the JSON code that you're going to be using. And as I said before, it reflects the element properties. So if we say click on this title, we've got FlowJo there. If we look within the body will hold all of the different elements. So the body is basically making up our card, whereas we've got additional parameters such as type, it's an adaptive card, and if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see the schema and the version. Well, if you focus in the body, you can see that we have the element here, the Flojo text, the text block. It has a size of medium and weight of boulder, so you can see the code here. But if you look on the right hand side in the elements property, you have the style where it's got medium selected and boulder. So it's just a code representation of the visual editor that we have in front of us. But what we need to remember is this code here is our adaptive card. So let's stop there for a second and just go over what we've seen. We've seen the title bar, which allows us to effectively create new cards, select areas, change versions, etc. We've got the card elements where we are hosting our elements that we're going to be able to work with within our adaptive card. We've got the visual editor where we can drag and drop and make visual changes. We've got the card structure, which effectively shows us the structure of the card. We've got the properties, so when we select a particular element, we can see all of the properties for that element. Then we've got the card payload editor, where we have information that we've placed throughout our drag and drop in, all of the element properties. All of this information is reflected into this card payload editor because this is the core code of our adaptive card. This is our adaptive card. And then we can add sample data if we wanted to reflect particular information on our cards. Now, let's begin by actually creating a blank card. So if I click new card and then I select blank card, we'll then get a nice blank card to begin work with. So how do we get from this to this? How do we create a title, an input, a submit button, and effectively make a text submission card for Microsoft Teams? Well, what we're going to firstly do before we do anything else is change the target version to 1.2 because Microsoft Teams is limited to 1.2 and before. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to create this title. So let's grab a text block and drag it and drop into our adaptive card. Now, what we were talking about before is that we have, once we've selected it, we have the element properties here. But let's first focus on the payload editor. Now, it's not very big at this point. You can see we've got the type of adaptive card, the schema, and the version. These are all the properties of our adaptive card. But within the body, this is the adaptive card itself that we're building. So you can see that when we dragged and dropped the text block into that particular area on the empty space on our adaptive card, it's added a type of text block, the text of new text block, and wrap of true. So if we go over to the right hand side here, you can also see that the text is new text block. You've got wrap selected, and it's a type of text block because you can see the text block type there. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that we add IDs to our particular content. This allows us to, in future videos, we'll go over this more, but this allows us to pass information back to, say, Power Automate and capture user input and keep them unique because they have their unique ID. So let's set the ID for this as title. Then we're going to want to change our title, so let's change it to adaptive card example. So we've got an adaptive card example title now. Well, what we want to do then is we actually want to apply some styling because at the moment it's just plain text. So let's set that to large and then let's set the weight to bolder. So just by doing those quick and easy steps, we've already created our adaptive card title. Let's go back to the bot framework so we can see what it looks like. There you go. It's exactly the same as our title there. All we've done is we've dragged and dropped the text block. We've changed some elements in the element properties section, and it's reflected in our card payload editor. Now what you might find is these little yellow squiggles under some of the stuff that you've selected. Now that's because when you're selecting the sizing or weight, it seems to pass it through with capitalizations. But it says the value is not accepted. Now I've tried this and it seems to work fine, but if you want to just make sure you're consistent, let's take out the capital letters at the beginning, and you can see there are no warnings on your adaptive card anymore. So we've created the title, we've created the initial element. Now we want to add an input element. So if you go down to the input section and drag the Input.Text under the title, you'll see that there is a placeholder text element that's been added. Again, it's been reflected in our card payload editor, and you can then edit in the element properties. But this time, just to show you that it works, let's change this placeholder text to provide your thoughts. And as you can see, it's instantly reflected on the designer. And if you select the element, you can see the placeholder text in the element's properties. So you can actually do all of this editing straight in the payload editor rather than in the element properties if you are more comfortable with working with JSON. But if you're not and you're new to all of this, then you can stick with the element properties and it will do all of this card payload editor JSON for you. Okay, so we've got a text entry. It's relatively small. We want a large multi-line text area because we want people to provide more than a single line of thoughts. What we want to do is on the right hand side, on the element properties, you can see the multi-line. So if you select that, you can provide a maximum length or a default value if you wanted to, but we're not going to for this demonstration. And you can see that it's increased the area that individuals can enter information. Now we want to separate this from our title. So if we add a separator in, it's going to add a faint line between the title and the text input. So if you see here on the final version, we've got separator lines here and here between the action button and the title, separating the actual text input. Okay, so we've done all of this, but now we need to add a ID so that we can capture that information in the future. Again, we're not going through actually capturing information in this video, but this is just something that we need to think about when we are actually building our adaptive cards. So if you add an ID of thoughts, that will reflect this element's ID, and then it will have a unique identifying characteristic. Next, what we want to do is we want to add an action element. So to add an action element, you want to add an action set. If you drag and drop that here, before we do anything, we're going to click on the separator so that we have our nice faint line to separate our input from our action. And then we're going to click on the add an action. Now, this is where the action set differs from the other elements that we've been working with so far. You need to select the specific type of action that you want to add, and you can add multiple. So you can have multiple buttons, for example. You can have multiple open URL buttons. But in our instance, we just want a submit button. So if we select action submit, it's going to add a button at the bottom of our adaptive card. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to click on that particular element and change the title from action.submit to just submit. We can change the style to positive to make it stand out more. You can add an ID of just submit. Oops. Submit. And then you can pass data if you wanted to whenever this button's pressed. Or you can add a icon URL, and you've got obviously all of those different properties that you can change. But what we've done is we've now added a title, we've added the input area and the submit button, and effectively created our first adaptive card. So let's just take a look over the code just to review what's going on. The initial object here is our title. You can see the ID of title, you can see the text information, the type of element it is, the additional properties that we've got of size and weight. You've got a type of text input in our next object. We've got an ID of thoughts. It's a multi-line area, it's got a separator, and then we've got an action set, and within that action set we've got an actions parameter. And you see this square open brackets here. It means it's an array, and we can have an array. We can have multiple items within an array, so we can have multiple buttons within an action set. So how do we then go from here to posting this to Microsoft Teams? Well, if we just click on copy payload, you've got to remember to back this information up because it's not going to be saved on this designer. Okay, so this is what the adaptive card looks like in Teams. When we've got it fully built, we've got the additional Teams properties in it. But how do we actually send this card, the card that we've just created, to Microsoft Teams? Well, I've created a Power Automate flow. I've got a manual trigger, and then I'm just going to click on New Step. I'm going to search for Microsoft Teams, click on the Teams, and then search for Adaptive, because there are many actions for Teams, and this will just filter it for us. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the Post Adaptive card in a chat or channel, just for this example. Obviously, when we are actually using this particular card to receive information, we're going to need to use wait for a response. But I'm creating another blog post and video about this, as this is a very complex and in-depth subject. So just for the purposes of this video, select the Post Adaptive card in chat or channel. We're going to post as the Flowbot. We're going to select the channel, and then we're going to select our team, which is Adaptive Cards Examples, and then we're going to select the channel. Now we're on our first video, which is make an adaptive card, so let's select that channel. Then you see this adaptive card field. It looks like you just put some text in here, but this is actually where you paste your payload that you've done. So this is our adaptive card. All of this JSON is our adaptive card. If we just test this now then and see how it goes, we can then see it in Microsoft Teams and see what we actually have at this particular point. Okay, so our flow ran successfully, and you can see that our card is very short. It doesn't fill the complete text area of Microsoft Teams. So how do we change and adapt adaptive cards to specific Microsoft Teams features, like the width of the particular card filling the text area on Microsoft Teams? Well, to do this, let's go back to our adaptive card. We can see, and we've focused on how the body contains all the information of the adaptive card elements and how it builds it up. But what we haven't really focused on is what all of this additional information is. Now these are the parameters of what your adaptive card is going to look like, feel like, and actually represent. So we've got the version, we've got the type, we're saying it's an adaptive card so that the endpoint knows what this particular JSON is using. We've got the schema, and the schema is going to allow us to design and build our adaptive card. And then we've got the version of 1.2 because this is what Teams needs. But to actually add additional Teams parameters, you need to do this outside of the body in this particular area. And what you need to do is you need to put MS Teams. And what this is going to allow us to do then is add Microsoft Teams parameters. Now, all I've done is I've added a string. So I've put a comma after the 1.2, added a string of MS Teams, small ms, capital T, Teams. Then I'm using a colon, and then I'm opening up my squiggly braces. What we're going to then do is add width. Oops, if I can spell width correctly. And then we're going to set that to 4. So you need to just make sure that you've got a comma after each one, because obviously they're individual parameters and you need to separate them, and that's what you use to separate them, just as you have got during the body. However, back to Microsoft Teams parameters, we've passed through a width of 4. Okay, so let's copy this then, and then let's go back to our Teams. We can obviously see that it's not 4 at the moment. Let's go back to our flow and replace this with our newly edited adaptive card with the MS Teams width of 4 in. And then let's just kick this off and see if it solves the issue of the card not spanning the full Teams environment. Okay, so that's been posted, and we can go back into our channel, and you can see that the adaptive card now is spanning the full width of the message box. So that is how you create an initial adaptive card for Microsoft Teams. That's how you use Microsoft Teams specific parameters to adapt for the environment, such as the width of the area of the chat box. And that is also how you send an adaptive card from Power Automate to Microsoft Teams. Now this is an introduction video. This is just to get you used to the building environment, get you used to the different element types, getting you used to adding IDs, and obviously getting you used to seeing an adaptive card being built. And the last thing we're going to touch on then for this video is, again, we've got the select host app. You can then select Microsoft Teams Lite to see what it would look like in Teams. It's going to show you the small version because it doesn't take into account the Microsoft Teams parameters. And then you can select dark to just see what your card looks like in different versions, because obviously people can select dark and light templates. Thanks for watching another video by me, Flo Joe. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that like button or select a video on your screen right now to continue learning more about the Power Platform.